Well, it's good to be here. We're in Poplar, Bluff today on a sunny Sabbath. A couple things I want to talk about have to do with another gospel. And what I want to talk about is two forms that the gospel takes today that Paul alluded to in Galatians, the first chapter, and verse 7. And this has been going on since this was written a long time ago, about 59 AD. Here's what he said, which is not another, talking about turn the grace of Yahweh into another, Yahshua into another gospel, verse 6. That is, grace becomes lasciviousness, as Jude talked about, which is not another, but there be some that trouble you and would pervert the gospel of the Messiah. And the form that it takes nowadays is not the gospel that he preached, but the gospel about him, about the Messiah. And the other form has to do with what we see on a grand scale. If you pay attention to politics just a little bit, or maybe a lot, you find that the same ploy that Satan used to try to tempt Yahshua, he still uses it today. It's very effective, and there's a reason why it's so effective. Well, the two gospels I'm going to talk about are the prosperity gospel and the gospel about Jesus Christ, about him. And we'll see some of the characteristics. I think you'll recognize some of those characteristics on the scene today. In Matthew, the 24th chapter, in verse 5, Yahshua made the statement that many shall come in my name, saying, I am the Messiah, and with that message shall deceive many. Now, there are roughly close to 50,000 different professing groups proclaiming their gospel today, roughly 50,000. And how are these going to deceive? Some of these are going to deceive the many, and how are they going to do it? Well, one way that they're doing it is the idea that God, quote unquote, wants you to be rich. He wants you to be prosperous. We call that the prosperity gospel. It's very common today. But why is this gospel so effective? There's a reason why it has such a following. And the reason goes back to human nature. 1 Timothy 6 and verse 10. And here's what it says. 1 Timothy 6 and verse 10. For a root of all the evils is the love of money, which certain longing for money, did go astray from the faith. The love of money, it's in the human nature. Money is power. I was watching a movie here a while back, or at least a short snippet of it, and this lawyer was telling him, he flipped a gold coin in the air and says, money is power. It's power because with money we can get. It's the power to get, it's the power to receive, it's the power to gain. And when you look at all the politicization that we see of different departments of our government and Congress, it's disconcerting to see the bribes on such a large scale. We were talking about this the other day at a meeting and discussing how it's so rampant with the lobbyists having control and the big pharma, you know the whole story. And it all revolves around the power of money. Bribery, the Bible talks about it, says a gift perverts judgment. It's talking about a bribe. So the power of money is deceptive because if you can get what you want, if you can receive and you make great gain, this can be mistaken for righteousness. And that's what Paul talked about over in 1 Timothy here. chapter 6, verses 5 and 7. He said, perverse disputings of men of corrupt minds and destitute of the truth. What truth is he talking about? David said, thy law is the truth. Destitute of the truth, supposing, now if you replace the truth with the root of all evil, a root of all evil, money, supposing that gain is godliness. So if you don't have the truth in your life, the default is to, of course, human nature. We all struggle with that. He says, from such withdraw yourself, those that think that gain is godliness. And he goes on to say a very sobering statement, which we all know is true. For we brought nothing into this world, and it is certain we can carry nothing out. I know King Tut was buried with his riches. There was one Chinese emperor that was buried with all the soldiers. They try to take their wealth with them. That's the whole idea of the pyramids. You take your wealth with you. But like he said, we carry nothing into this world, and it's for certain we're not going to take anything out. We leave it all behind. Well, here's the parable that Joshua gave regarding this sort of thing. And riches are not bad. In themselves, they're not bad. We have to have money in this life. Abraham was very rich in cattle and silver and gold. So he was a very wealthy man. And apparently he could handle it. And that's the problem, is being able to handle the power of it. Now, Joshua gave a parable, and here's what he said. This is over in Matthew, the 13th chapter, and verse 22. This is the parable of the sower. And this is just an example that Joshua gave so that we'd be aware of the power of wealth. He said, he also that receives seed among the thorns is he that hears the word. Now, a lot of people have heard the word. We've been getting this message out since 1991 to thousands and thousands and thousands of people. They hear the word. They've read it. They know what we believe. They hear the word and the care of this life. Well, other things get in the way. We all have to take care of business. We have to pay rent or pay a mortgage, or we have to buy groceries. We have to sustain life in whatever way we can do it. That's just part of existence, and Yahweh knows that. But he says the care of this world and the deceitfulness of riches choke the word. Now, these are people that have heard. They were fruitful at one time, because it says, and he becomes unfruitful. In other words, they were on board to some extent. They were bearing good fruit. They were making progress. But certain things happen, which we'll mention here in just a little bit, that can happen. Joshua talked about it. And they become unfruitful. Not because they're suddenly no longer believe. It's that everything else got in the way. Like it said there at the very beginning, those that know not the truth. If you don't hold the truth as number one in your life, and that law is the truth, and Yahweh's word is the truth, other things will take its place. It's just that simple. And people have said this before in different places. You're going to have a, quote, a God of some kind. Everybody has a God. Atheists basically worship themselves. So you're going to have some sort of something you look up to as superior, and money is what we're talking about here. Riches, it's not always necessarily money. It can be success. You can get drunk on success. They become unfruitful. And so the problem is these other things that can get in the way. Because we only have 24 hours in the day, and we want to sleep a few of those hours. And so in that 24 hours, we have to juggle certain priorities. It's always that way. And so the situation with following this way is a matter of juggling everything that we must do and everything that we want to do. There's sometimes those things are blurred. And everything that we want to do versus keeping our eye on the target of making it into Yahweh's kingdom. And so that's always the problem, is maintaining the focus, the laser-like focus that we need to be able to cast aside those things that would derail our efforts to make it into the kingdom. There's nothing more important than that. Nothing more important than that. And as far as we know, we have one shot at this. This is our chance. We have one shot. Not 2 or 3 or 4. Does it make sense that those who are now enlightened, as Paul said, says if they fall away, it's impossible to renew them to the truth. It's called apostasy. If we fall away from that, it's hard to go back the other way. So the problem is staying fruitful, staying focused, keeping that priority, and pushing it aside. And so we do it maybe once a month. I remember when I was in this one church, this guy was talking about studying the Bible. He says, I might read it once every 2 weeks or so, maybe once every 3 weeks. Study to show thyself approved, a workman that needs not to be ashamed, rightly dividing the word of truth. And Paul said in Hebrews, the 6th chapter, let's just turn there for just a moment, Hebrews, the 6th chapter. Paul made this statement, and it's good to review these things from time to time. I'm sorry, it's the 5th chapter. Hebrews, the 5th chapter, starting at verse 12. For when for the time you ought to be teachers, you have need that one teach you again, which be the first principles of the oracles of Yahweh. See, we can become unfruitful. Any of us can be. We sort of go backwards, either going forwards or backwards. And sometimes it happens that we can go backwards the other way. And it becomes, sure, relatively unimportant, except occasionally. The first principles, what are they? Repentance from dead works. First principles. That's what Paul talked about in chapter 6 and verse 1. First principles. That's elementary. Dead works are those works that produce death. Faith without works is dead. It's a dead faith. And says, are become as such as have need, and are become such as have need of the milk and not of strong meat. The milk of the word, Isaiah talks about that. Who are those that are weaned from the breast that we can teach doctrine? Those that are weaned from the breast. Here a little, there a little, line upon line, being able to rightly divide the word. But it takes effort. For everyone that uses milk is unskillful in the word of righteousness, for he is a babe. For strong meat belongs to them that are of full age, Margin says mature. Even those who by reason of use have their senses exercised to discern good from evil. And in our next insight, we have an article about discerning judgment, discerning good and evil, those kinds of things, because Joshua mentioned weighty matters of the law, judgment, mercy, and faith. Those are some heavy topics. So our senses exercised to discern good from evil, it just takes practice. And if we don't do this, we can become unfruitful, because the cares of this life are very appealing, and we live in a very materialistic society. America is very materialistic. We worship We worship money. I know Oscar Wilde, a playwright from the 1800s, called that century the century of greed, because all they're interested in is money. That's what he said. And we're talking about 18, 20, 30, 50, 60, 80. In the 1800s, he saw it that way. Well, maybe it's a good thing he's not living now. He'd been in a state of shock all the time, because we're in the age of materialism, pretty much. And I'm very thankful to Yahweh, we all are, that we have access to plenty of food. Plenty of very, very easy to get. It's a blessing to be able to walk in with money in your pocket, to be able to just pick it off the shelf. And Ezekiel talked about a warning, or Jeremiah rather, about the guilt of Sodom. It was careless ease and abundance of food. Careless ease and abundance of food and disregard for the poor. So, and of course, going after abominations. But it mentions those things that really struck me, that in this age, used to be called the Gilded Age in the 1890s or so, in this age of prosperity, it looks like we're edging toward that same spiritual lackadaisia that Sodom and Gomorrah got in. So this becoming unfruitful is a difficult thing sometimes to avoid, but it's something we have to try to do. Over in Matthew, the 19th chapter, Yahshua said, "Verily I say to you that a rich man," Matthew 19 verses 22 and 23 and 24, "Verily I say to you that a rich man shall hardly enter into the kingdom of heaven." Well, of course, riches are relative. You know, in this country, we live like kings compared to third world cesspools, wherever they are, you know. And again, I say to you, he repeated himself as if the disciples didn't get it the first time. Because he was dealing with this situation where this rich man came to him and said, "Good master, what must I do to inherit eternal life?" He said, "Keep the commandments." He said, "Well, which ones?" Yahshua laid out some of them. Obviously, he didn't repeat all 606. And he said, I've done all those since I was a kid, you know. Yahshua said, "But you neglected something. Go and sell all that you have and give it to the poor and come follow me." Well, that was you know, that's one of those situations where I'll follow Yahshua, but there's a point beyond which that's just asking too much. And that was asking too much. So he went away sorrowful because he had much wealth, much riches. And that's a question that I've asked myself. Suppose Yahshua said, "Go and sell all that you have and give to the poor and come follow him." That's a tall order. If you have a lot. Now, if you don't have a lot, it's not that much to give up. But that was a tough order, because he was having to give up a lot. And I think that's a measure of our willingness to follow Yahshua, is how much we have to give up to do it. Give up friends, give up family. What's it take? What's the cost? But he repeated it again. He said, "And again I say to you, it's easier for a camel to go through the eye of a needle than for a rich man to enter the kingdom of heaven, the kingdom of Yahweh." Well, on this theme of the prosperity gospel, Satan uses that to great advantage today. But that's nothing new. That's nothing new. What did he use in tempting Yahshua? Let's look at it. Here's what he said to Yahshua. Yahshua just fasted 40 days. Can you imagine? Fasted 40 days. That's a long time. They say your body starts consuming itself after 40 days. You've already used all of your reserves in fat. And here's what it said. This is over in Luke, the 4th chapter, verses 5 through 7. Luke 4, verses 5 through 7. And the devil, after he finished his 40-day fast, or near the end of it, and the devil taking him up into a high mountain, I want you to notice what he showed him. And you think about the landscape of politics today, of the way business is done in many cases. And the devil takes him to a high mountain and showed him all the kingdoms of the world. All the kingdoms. In a moment of time. I'm not sure exactly how that happened. And said, now notice what he said. All this power. Remember, money is power. All this power will I give you, and the glory of them. Now, you think about that. Isn't that what we see too much in our Congress? People bought off for a price. Power and the glory of it all. Being able to go to the finest parties, hobnob with the great and near great like they're doing in Davos, Switzerland, at the World Economic Forum, where all the rich and the near rich and the powerful are meeting there to decide your fate, what they think they should do, under the guise of different things like climate change is one of the big things, you know. All this power I'll give you, and all the glory of them. I think the climate alarmists are not really interested in the climate. They're interested in power and the money, the control, the glory of them. For this is delivered to me. Where did he get that? How did it come into his hands? Well, I talked about that at Passover or maybe Pentecost. I don't remember. He stole it from Adam and Eve. He stole it from Adam by getting him to sin. Because Adam was the man in charge. He was the king of the earth. So he got it by theft. He's a thief. And to whomsoever I will, I give it. And Joshua didn't dispute that. He didn't say that's not true. Therefore, if you will therefore worship me, all this shall be yours. Now, do you honestly think that Satan would give up all of that, divest himself of all the power and all the glory and all the wealth of those kingdoms, just because Joshua would worship him? So then he would be subject to Joshua, wouldn't he? In some extent, at least financially. I believe he was just baiting him. I believe that was guile. He was lying to him. I think if Joshua had done that, it's all, I was just joking. But you know, Joshua, he could not be bought. That's why the Pharisees didn't. That's one reason the Pharisees didn't like him. He wouldn't be part of the good old boys club. The Jerusalem crowd, the Pharisees, Sadducees, and the scribes. He wasn't in the in crowd. He didn't want to be in the in crowd. And they couldn't buy him off. Satan couldn't buy him off. Look at that. All the kingdoms of the world. Prosperity gospel. The prosperity gospel. You know what it says in Ezekiel 28 and verse 5, talking about the king of Tyrus, which actually is referring to Satan. That's one of the thrones of Satan, by the way, in Tyrus. It says, your heart is lifted up because of your riches. That was one of the complaints that this prophecy has towards Satan. His heart's lifted up because of his riches. It does do that. It can do that. Now, it's interesting that Satan has such a firm grasp of human nature that he knows where to tempt and how to tempt. And I've heard people say, I guess it's true, what is the price? They say some people There was a guy giving a sermonette many years ago at a church I was in, and he said, is a cigarette your price? Oh, well, that's not high enough. Well, what about a new car? Or what about a prestigious position? What is your price? So I think Satan knows, because he figured that was the price. That Joshua, who was born to be a king, he said that he could buy him with that. He couldn't do it. Joshua could not be bought. And if he can't be bought, the powers that be in many cases are not interested in you. Lifted up because of riches. Satan still uses this same thing, and that's why we call it the prosperity gospel. Their churches and their leaders become filthy rich in cash, real estate holdings, business investments, ranches. There's one church in this country, very prominent church, is the largest ranch owner in America. It's the church. This church is. And the way they do this is by spreading another gospel Paul was talking about. Another gospel of false tithing on money. That's a biggie. That is really a big one. And what they do is they tell their followers by a percentage of their income that they owe to the church. Now, I've been in those churches like that. You get baptized, and they make sure that you get that first, second, and third tithe down. And that's not all. Building fund, offerings for this, there's no end to it. But this is a part of their come on is get you hooked on the promise of prosperity, riches, this cosmic genie that Joshua is supposed to be, whose whole job is to serve you, to give you wealth and health and happiness, like a cosmic butler. There for your every wish. You rub the little lamp, and the genie says, okay, you get 3 wishes, 6 wishes, whatever it was, Aladdin's lamp. It's sort of like that. The holdout of anything you want, the promise of riches, if you'll just worship the wrong deity. And so as a result of being locked in with a false doctrine, and people follow their money. I know from experience, being in this church, and I've examined and thought about why people were so loyal. People were absolutely loyal to that congregation. A widow that I know had 5 kids, got them all to the feast every year. 5, by herself. Husband did not go. People were absolutely devoted. And one reason they were so devoted is because they followed their money. When you take in 10 to 20% and more of a person's income, gross, people follow that. We do that. So what happens is the gospel of Jesus Christ, was the term that's used, is such that the Bible has become a get-rich-quick scheme. It works. And so when you look at these church buildings, I was in a town this week and driving down Main Street, and I saw this huge building. I thought, is this a courthouse? No, it was a church. It was massive. It had it was like a monolith of structure worth millions. I mean, it's like, wasn't as big as the pyramids, but it was huge. And I passed this other building going in another direction, and this thing was massive. I thought, I wonder what that is. I wonder if it's a funeral home. Lots of times they're big. And when I got close enough to see, it was a church. But it was massive. I thought, how many homeless people could be helped with just a very, very small percentage of what it takes to build all these church buildings? And there's not a single ounce of evidence in the Bible that Yahshua, the New Testament church, ever built great buildings. Not one that I know of. The true church. Well, that's one reason why the bishops and the deacons have the qualification, must meet the qualification, is they're not given to filthy lucre. That's what it says in the King James, which is greedy for gain. It says deacons must also not be greedy for gain. And so that's what you look for. Doesn't mean they're not conscientious with their money. Just they're always greedy, That's a qualification because Yahweh knows a root of all evil is money. And if people love money too much, they'll compromise. They will compromise. Solomon was very rich. And here's what he said in Ecclesiastes 12 and verse 13. It's always good to think about this, I think. Let us hear, now here's the guy that's the wealthiest man probably ever lived. The temple he built in today's money was about $500 billion, over nearly $500 billion in today's money, the cost of that temple. And this guy had anything he wanted. He said, whatever my heart desired, I got it. But after all of that, here's what he said. Let us hear the conclusion of the whole matter. Fear Yahweh. The fear of Yahweh is to hate evil. Fear Yahweh and keep his commandments. For this is the whole duty of man. This is why we're put here. We're put here to keep Yahweh, to fear Yahweh and keep his commandments. Well, Yahshua gave us a caution about counting the cost of all this. Why do you get into this? What's the purpose of it? It's not about the show. It's not about the limelight. He said, if any man comes to me and not love less his father and his mother and his wife and children and brethren and sisters, yea, and his own life also, he cannot be my disciple. That's a high price. You have to love everything else less than you love Yahweh. Or you can't be his disciple. You can't love your life more than love of Yahweh. And he went ahead and said, that's Luke 14 and verse 26. Yahshua said, if any man come after me, let him deny himself and take up his cross and follow me. Not too far behind. If he's out of sight, you want to stay close enough to Yahweh and Yahshua that you can hear what he's saying. And whosoever shall lose his life for my sake shall find it. And here's the final bottom line. Very important. For what is a man profited if he shall gain the whole world, all the kingdoms, the power and the glory of all those kingdoms? What would it have profited Yahshua if he had done that, if he had worshipped him? Or what shall a man give in exchange for his life, his soul? There's nothing. Even though Satan said, well, skin for skin, all that man has will he give in exchange for his life. That's not enough. There's nothing we can give in exchange for our life. Well, that's the prosperity gospel. And that's where it leads away from Yahweh. And the other part of it is the gospel of Jesus Christ. That's the other prong of this new gospel, this other gospel. And that's what we started out to mention. But let's look at the gospel of Jesus Christ shortly here, because this is part of the other gospel, the two-pronged approach that Satan is using today to deceive the world, and he is a great deceiver. Isaiah 30 verses 9 and 10 said, this people will not hear my law. They said, speak to us about smooth things. Smooth things. Think about that prophecy. Here's the Messiah that the world worships. Never says anything negative, He accepts everybody. And as I said, he's more like a cosmic genie. Is loved and widely accepted by all. Is that not the case? Loved and widely accepted by all. Never corrects you of sin. He lets you do as you want as long as we all love each other. He only makes kind suggestions, never demands. He hates to offend you, would never offend you. That's why he's so easy to accept, because he would never offend anybody. In other words, the Messiah that the world worships basically has no backbone, makes no demands. He promotes unity. Now, how many times in political campaigns do you hear that theme trotted out? Unity. Better together. United. The ecumenical movement, the church movement, is the brotherhood of mankind. Everybody under one cloak. And that's going to happen. Revelations talks about there's going to be a one-world religion that if you don't accept that, you're going to be killed. You can't buy or sell without it. And if you don't worship at that altar, then you're going to be killed. It's a world-ruling, political, religious system promoting unity and the brotherhood of mankind, the ecumenical movement. The World Council of Churches is spearheading that. He wants to bring the world together. Together. You can worship however you want, as long as we love each other. You don't have to keep the Sabbath. You can profane it. You can look the other way. And I'm amazed when I think about the prosperity gospel, how often people will look the other way, regardless of how evil it may be. Turn a blind eye to it and look the other way for the sake of money. Now, another thing that happens with this Messiah, the way he's worshipped, exalts signs and wonders. There's a nephew of mine who went on a mission trip. He was trying to get donations to go. And he went to this conference somewhere in a foreign country. And he talked about the great miracles that they saw. Healings, mental healings, physical healings, great miracles. Was that the test of the truth? How do you know? You know, one of the things prophesied in Revelations is that there's going to be great signs and wonders, such that if it were possible, the very elect would be deceived. Exalt signs and wonders over the word. Blow the dust off the Bible and see what it says. Encourage us is to get as much as we can from this life. Well, those are just the two-pronged approach that we see in the gospel, the new gospel, the other gospels that we have. And I just wanted to summarize that by saying, if you have all these things that these two types of gospels hold out, is that enough to make it into Yahweh's kingdom? Is it worth it? Is it worth it? Is the immediacy of the moment, is the prosperity of the moment or of the year, is it worth giving up on the kingdom of Yahweh? The whole problem that humanity has faced over the years is the problem of immortality, the problem of mortality. If you don't solve that problem, the rest of it doesn't matter anyway. The rest of it doesn't matter anyway. And we all face it. So what Yahshua came preaching, the gospel of the Messiah, not about him, came preaching what he preached. is the good news of the coming kingdom of Yahweh. And he said, repent, for the kingdom of Yahweh is at hand. That's what he came preaching. I don't know everything that he wore every day. I don't really care. But the gospel you hear is about him, not about what he taught. And so our job is to cling to the truth, stay the course, not be derailed by the cares of this life, whether it's money or whether it's just whatever it happens to be that gets in the way, success or lack of it. People go both ways. People in abject poverty are not any more likely to accept the truth than rich people. Usually rich people are less likely. The richer they are, the less likely they are to follow the truth. Why? Because there's so many more things you can be involved in. So I'm going to end with this statement by Joshua, what he said. For what is a man profited if he shall gain the whole world and lose his own soul? Or what shall a man give in exchange for his soul? And the answer to that question is nothing. When we stand on Judgment Day before Yahweh, the high court, we're going to stand alone. We're not going to have the media backing us, or we're going to answer alone. And so, like we came into this world with nothing, we're taking nothing out if we don't make it into Yahweh's kingdom.